Your brain is an amazing thing and it works in mysterious ways. This year we're really hoping to find out a little bit more about how our brain works and look at some of the conditions, curious and quirky, that affect our brains or manifest the way our brains work. Sadly, one of the conditions that affects our brains and is increasingly impacting on Australians is dementia. In fact, I think the figures were something like nearly 450,000 people have been affected by dementia in Australia just last year. That's a huge number, and the Advertiser was running a story saying that in future, in several years, it could outstrip heart disease as one of the biggest killers of people in Australia. So it's worth us finding out a little bit more about it. Professor Ashley Bush is co-head of dementia research at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health. Professor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sonia.
Great to talk with you. The brain is an amazing thing. What's happening with the brain when dementia begins to set in?
Well, dementia is mostly a disease of older age, usually above the age of 60. And in dementia, parts of the brain fail that have to do with communication, thinking, and memory. And it's a disorder which, in most cases, gradually deteriorates. And there are several causes of dementia, but the most common cause is Alzheimer's disease.
How do we know when that's happening? I mean, you talk to people and they'll say, oh, I think mum or dad is showing signs of dementia. But is it just by the symptoms that we know, or can we definitively say this?
Well, we've become better at diagnosing it using mainly imaging tests. But the symptoms of dementia are usually gradual in their onset, and usually the first prominent symptom is short-term memory loss. But short-term memory loss is also a fairly common symptom that causes some concern as people age anyway. That it's the type of memory loss that deteriorates over time. So over, say, a period of 12 months, the memory function is deteriorating continually and getting worse and worse. So it's that continuous deterioration of memory that could be the more sinister symptom that is indicating that there's a serious dementia coming on.
Now, Professor Ashley Bush is joining us. If you've got a question for him in relation to this and what we know about it and how it works, feel free to give us a call, 1300 222 891. You can also text us on 0467 922 891 here on ABC Radio Adelaide, South Australia and Broken Hill. Why are we seeing so many Australians suffering from dementia now? Is it increasing, or are we just knowing more about it? We're determining it more?
The average life expectancy is increasing. So medicine has been really good at bringing us, on average, into old age. And this is a challenge that we face, is that because medicine has been so good at treating heart disease and cancer, that we're now left with an increased prevalence of diseases of old age, and of which dementia and Alzheimer's disease are a very, very large burden. So if you've survived heart disease and cancer and you're now in that retirement age, one of the big risks that's being faced is what to do about dementia, because it's so common, representing about 5% of people over the age of 60.
Mm. And is there much that we're finding that we can do about it now?
Well, this is a great challenge. Dementias are still one of the most difficult diseases to understand and to treat. Firstly, any disease of the brain is difficult to treat because the brain is such a delicate organ and it's housed in such a special compartment within the body that is so hard to penetrate with drugs. So even if we have some ideas about what chemical changes are occurring in the brain that we would like to target in terms of trying to cure these disorders, it still becomes a great challenge in terms of the science underneath it to get these treatments to the brain compartment itself safely and for it to be well tolerated and safe enough to use as a prescription. And also Alzheimer's disease and the other dementias are slow disorders. So in order to prove whether a treatment is effective requires long clinical trials, and we can't just experiment with people. We have to actually study them very carefully. And in the case of Alzheimer's disease, for example, a typical clinical trial would be in the order of 12 months, sometimes 18 months. And then we have to do these kind of trials a few times. And we need to do all of this work in order just to determine whether or not a treatment has got a chance of being effective. And in most cases, if we get the guess wrong, we have to start at the beginning again.
Yeah. So is the best we can really hope for is to stop the progress of it or slow the rate of progress?
Well, as medical researchers, we aim realistically. So certainly first base would be to slow the rate of deterioration that occurs in Alzheimer's or other dementias. But then the ambition is that once we actually have a convincing way of slowing down the deterioration, we hope to be able to stop it completely and then hopefully to be able to reverse it if that's at all possible.
My guest is Professor Ashley Bush. Beck's given us a ring from Victor Harbour. Hello, Beck.
Hello, Happy New Year to you both. Professor, I have an auntie and she's a lovely lady and she can remember things 55 years ago, but if I bring her flowers, she'll say, oh, where did they come from? She can't remember 5 minutes ago. And is there anything that we can do to give her extra vitamins or minerals in her diet to assist in slowing this process down?
So short and long-term memory loss.
Yes. Well, Becca, actually what you're describing is the classic symptoms of dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease, because it affects the short-term memory machinery first, and the long-term memory is preserved. So typically, patients will say that they can remember what happened decades ago better than they can remember what they had for lunch or breakfast. And that's a classic feature of the disease, and that sounds like what has happened in your family member's case. In terms of supplements and so forth, it is very important for a person who's got any form of memory disorder to be checked up by a doctor, either the GP or possibly also a neurologist or psychiatrist or psychogeriatrician, who'll check for any medical explanation that could be interfering with brain function. Because in about 5% of cases, there is some treatable underlying disorder elsewhere in the body that's impacting upon the function of the brain and memory. And this can include nutritional problems, so deficiencies of various kind. And for example, vitamin B12 deficiency or vitamin D deficiency, this can affect the efficiency of the function of the brain and can be fairly easily corrected. But unfortunately, in 95% of cases, there's nothing like that to be found, and the person has got a case of dementia or Alzheimer's disease, which is going to deteriorate without any possibility of convincingly being able to slow it down with any kind of medical intervention that we have currently. We can boost function with some drugs, and we have some drugs that we use to maintain people's function by stimulating them for as long as possible. But this does not actually stop the brain from deteriorating despite anything else that we can do.
But they're prescribed drugs, not just vitamins or supplements.
Correct.
Yeah. Robert, thank you, Beck, for your call. Robert is in Lyndoch.
Yeah, good afternoon. I guess my question is similar to the last one, but I'm in my mid-60s, and I'll try to give you an example. If I was in the kitchen or something and I'd left the car keys in the bedroom, I might walk down to the bedroom and then think, now, why am I standing here, sort of thing. Or if somebody's introduced to me, a new person, meet Wayne. So five minutes later, I've forgotten Wayne. I can't remember his name. But my point is that I can sort of remember 30 years ago, I had the same sort of problem with trying to remember somebody's name if I was introduced. So how do you actually know if you're getting worse, or is it just something that's common, or have I got the early stages of a problem?
Well, it doesn't sound like you've got the early stages of a dementia. What you're describing is actually a really common symptom that can occur to people who are busy, who've got crowded thoughts in their head. the most important thing is whether or not this problem of remembering bits and pieces is getting worse, and whether some very strange lapses in memory occur, such as forgetting the names of your children or maybe even your grandchildren, but most importantly, whether it's getting worse over time. And I'm talking about time intervals and measured in about 3 to 6 months, whether this kind of memory lapse is getting worse and worse. Then it could be the beginning of something.
I mean, what Robert's describing sounds like life to me.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert.
No problem.
Let's bring into this discussion now Maree McCabe. She is CEO of Dementia Australia and also has a parent with dementia. Maree, thanks for your time.
You're very welcome, Sonia.
Maree, just from your personal experience with your parent, what sort of impact do you think dementia has on people, and what sort of changes did you notice?
Look, the impact that dementia has is really profound. And the first thing that we noticed with Dad had dementia with Lewy bodies. So it wasn't memory that was an issue with him initially. What we noticed was a change in his personality, a change in his mood, and he was originally diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome because he was very apathetic. And, you know, my dad trained horses. He was, you know, on the land and had trucks. So he was a really active man, and all of a sudden found difficulty doing anything. So he was originally diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, then depression, and finally dementia with Lewy bodies. And in fact, it had been the dementia that had been the problem all along. So we found he started swearing a lot at home. Now, it wasn't that he didn't know how to swear, but my father would never swear at home. And he started to swear and make really inappropriate comments about people that were completely out of character. So they were the first things that we noticed with Dad.
Professor, when you hear what Maree's saying about her dad's experience, can you talk about this mood change and how that rolls? Because we often just talk about memory loss.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, memory loss is one of the most conspicuous symptoms of the main cause of dementia, which is Alzheimer's disease. But as Maree points out, there are other important causes of dementia, and these other causes can present with different symptoms. Very often with dementias that are slowly, what we call slowly progressive, that means the deterioration is gradual, the first symptoms can be quite non-specific and vague. They can include mood changes, and that could include depression or anxiety. And between the different causes of dementia, there can be this kind of common overlap where there is this period before things start to become seriously disorganized, where a person is developing psychological symptoms, which could be thought of as expressing distress, and very often the patient involved is considered to perhaps having an episode of depression and treated for that, and that's not uncommon. And then over time, there's more deterioration in other parts of the brain, in which the dementia is actually manifesting itself. And this leads to the different types of dementia diagnosis that we have. And we understand that there are different chemical processes going on in these different types of dementia.
Maree, these are obviously, what was the impact on the family? Because that, I guess, is the thing we haven't spoken about too much.
Well, I think the impact on my mother, who was his primary carer, was significant. And unfortunately, Mum didn't let us know. And it's very typical of people in that age group who, you know, you grin and bear it and you get on with it. And we didn't realise that, unfortunately, Dad was as unwell and debilitated as he actually was. And we were unaware of the impact that it was having on my mother. So, you know, Mum was caring for him and doing things, and she had her own health issues. So parents were both in their 80s then, and it's a very common thing to find where you've got carers in, you know, older carers with health conditions caring for their loved ones living with dementia. And Sonia, if people have this concern and they want further information, please call the National Dementia Helpline on 1800 100 500, and our team of experts are there to assist people with everything they need to know about.
Maree, thank you for that. Maree McCabe, CEO of Dementia Australia. Now, before we let you go, Professor, a couple of quick questions on our text line. A new study, says Pat, shows impaired glucose uptake is a defining symptom of dementia. Is it a case of type 3 diabetes? Are you familiar with this?
Yes, yes, I am. That's been a very intriguing line of work. Obviously, the brain relies a great deal upon energy to function. 20% of the calories of the body are spent in the brain. So if it has problems with its energy metabolism, specifically using glucose to create energy, then you could imagine that the brain function is going to be impaired. So this is actually a description which is quite common, this inability to use glucose, and try to understand exactly what's going wrong and what are the steps may actually lead to, hopefully, disease-modifying or a curative drug for dementia. So there's a lot there that we still need to understand, but that looks like a very important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Well, as we talk about working out what this puzzle is, I've also got a texter from Belinda who says, can you talk about and I might be saying this incorrectly, the Dementia Protocol?
Yes.
Belinda says it addresses the underlying drivers of inflammation, that is insulin resistance, lack of neurotrophic support, toxic exposure. And it's been pioneered by the UCLA, I think, a neurologist there. People are reversing Alzheimer's following his protocol. Is that a similar sort of thing?
Well, yes, this is Dale Bredesen, who's a very illustrious researcher in the dementia field from California. And what he's done is he's analysed the biochemical literature for instances where there could be interventions with either lifestyle or with supplements that might benefit the underlying disease process in Alzheimer's disease specifically. And he's written a protocol about this. And his philosophy is this is what he would do to himself or a family member if they came down with these incurable diseases. And his thinking is that it's slow going trying to prove that these interventions might work using phase 3 or 2 clinical trials, so these big clinical trials I mentioned to you before. But there is a lot of evidence at the preclinical level, at the level of testing in animals and in experimental systems, as well as some observations in humans, but that are not at the level of pharmacological clinical trials.
Well, Professor, thank you for your time today. Professor Ashley Bush is co-head of dementia research at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health. We also thank Maree McCabe.